She was scrolling mindlessly, half listening to the kettle in her kitchen, when her fingers froze. On the screen was a glossy tabloid headline. Lucien Maddox welcomes first child with influencer Callista Rain. Rowena Hale didn't blink. Her eyes were locked onto the image beneath the caption. A man she once called husband, beaming with a newborn swaddled in his arms. Next to him, the woman everyone called effortless. But it wasn't their smug smiles that made her breath hitch. It was the baby. Because the baby had her eyes. Not similar, not coincidental. Hers. The same amber hazel ring around the pupils, a subtle fleck just below the iris, so distinct. Rowena had once been told by doctors that it was considered a rare genetic trait. Her knees nearly gave way. She gripped the edge of the counter, heart pounding in her chest like a warning bell. This wasn't jealousy. It wasn't envy. It was recognition. That child was connected to her in a way no one else seemed to see. Not yet. Her hands trembled, but her thoughts were sharp, cold, controlled. She hadn't spoken to Lucien in nearly a year. Not since their last IVF cycle, when hope was hanging by threads and she was too drained to keep fighting. But this was not possible. Those embryos were locked away, legally protected, monitored, frozen in wait, just as she had been, waiting for healing, waiting for a second chance. And now her husband, the man who once whispered promises into her hair, was holding a child that looked like the one she'd dreamed of, wept for, and prayed over. No, there had to be a mistake. But her body already knew. Her body always knew. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply you never thought to question what they might do in your absence? Rowena did, and the cost was unlike anything she had ever prepared for. Not in her worst night terrors, not in the quiet moments of self-blame after failed procedures, not even in the lonely hours where her reflection felt like a stranger's face. Her pain had a new name now, Silas. But what if the truth didn't stay buried? What if it fought its way to the surface, through documents meant to stay hidden, through signatures she never gave, through one test, one undeniable truth that would bring a billionaire to his knees? This story is about that test, that truth, that mother. Before we go further, I just want to pause and say this to every woman listening. May your peace never be stolen. May your heart always find its way home. And may justice never have to scream to be heard. If you're ready to walk through this fire with Rowena, stay close, because what she did next changed everything. But before we go deeper into this true life storm of love, betrayal, and quiet power, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail, where truth walks and every story has a pulse. Rowena didn't call anyone. She didn't send a message. She simply closed the screen, reached for her coat, and walked out the door. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at her dining table, lights dim, replaying every moment of their final year together, his distance, the strange calls he'd take in other rooms, the subtle shift in his eyes whenever she mentioned trying one more round. She hadn't wanted to believe he'd given up on them. On her. But maybe he hadn't just given up. Maybe he'd made a different choice altogether. The kind of choice that required forged papers, the kind that needed silence, secrecy, and calculated steps. And what if the cost of that choice was a child created from her body? She had to know, not just for herself, but for the part of her that still believed in truth. It started with a call to her former fertility clinic. The staff had changed, so had the management, but some records still remained, enough to make her blood run cold. A familiar nurse hesitated before answering her last question. There was a pause, thick with guilt. "Mrs. Maddox, I thought you'd already been informed." That was all Rowena needed to hear. There are betrayals that stab, and there are betrayals that excavate you. What Lucien had done wasn't just a breach of marriage. It was a violation of something sacred. He hadn't stolen money. He hadn't taken property. He had taken potential. He had taken hope. He had taken part of her and given it away, without her consent, without her knowledge, and without shame, all while the world applauded him as a father. But what he didn't count on was her strength. Rowena didn't post online. She didn't chase cameras or stir gossip. She did something far more powerful. She hired a lawyer. And then a lab. One cheek swab. One test. That was all it would take. A child's DNA. A mother's truth. And a secret no amount of money could bury. Lucien had always been a man of status, of charm, of control. But truth? Truth didn't care about money. Truth didn't need headlines. It only needed light. And Rowena, quiet, graceful, underestimated Rowena, was about to strike the match. If you're still watching, you're already part of something bigger than a story. You're walking with a woman who chose courage over chaos. Stay close, because the storm is just beginning. Make sure you're subscribed, and if you're feeling this journey already, tap that like button so more people can walk this road with us. Charleston moved at its own rhythm. Not fast. Not slow. Just patient. Along the cobbled streets and weathered buildings, the past didn't hide. It breathed. Every brick, every archway held a whisper of something remembered. And inside one modest but enchanting gallery, just off Trad Street, Rowena Hale curated silence. She wasn't famous. She wasn't loud. But those who knew her work understood she didn't just display art, she listened to it. Soft-spoken and kind, Rowena had the presence of someone who didn't chase attention, but carried a grace that invited it anyway. She wore linen and cotton, earth tones, hair always loosely pinned, and her eyes, amber with a flick of hazel, had the strange ability to hold pain and peace at the same time. She had built the gallery from scratch, one exhibition at a time. She believed in artists who had something to say, even when they didn't know how to say it yet. For her, beauty wasn't in boldness. It was in restraint. The way two colors could almost touch and never meet. The way negative space said more than brushstrokes ever could. That was Rowena's world. Quiet, steady, thoughtful. Until the day he walked in. Lucian Maddox did not belong in that gallery. Everything about him suggested motion. Tailored charcoal suit, shirt crisp like it had just come from the hanger. A phone in his hand that kept buzzing, even as he tried to look interested in a sculpture by the window. He looked like a man trying to remember how to stand still. Rowena had seen his type before. Tech executives, investors, status chasers. They rarely bought anything. They came for dates or decor, not meaning. But Lucien came alone. No assistant, no fanfare, just him and, surprisingly, a question. Do you have anything that feels like a beginning? She looked up from the catalog she was sorting, not sure she'd heard him right. A beginning? She asked. He nodded. I'm shopping for my mother. She's been through some things. I want something that feels like, I don't know, hope, maybe? It wasn't the kind of thing most people would say out loud, especially not men like him. Something softened in her shoulders. They talked for 40 minutes that day, about the concept of beginnings, about how hope can be found in unfinished edges and muted tones, about grief and silence and the pressure to always be fine. He didn't talk like a billionaire. He didn't lead with his resume. He listened. Lucien left with a piece titled Untied Stillness, a painting by a South African artist who had survived a traumatic injury and found her voice again through charcoal and texture. As he handed over his card, he paused. I'm Lucien, by the way. Rowena, do you always talk to your customers like that? Only the ones who don't pretend to know everything. He smiled. The kind of smile that was rare, not charming, but disarmed. Over the next few weeks, he came back. Not often, but often enough that she noticed. Sometimes with questions, sometimes with coffee. Once, just to ask if she had any new pieces with red in them. He wasn't intrusive. He never lingered too long. But he made her laugh, not loud belly laughs, but soft ones that snuck up on her. She learned he was self-made, built his first company in college, sold it, started another, invested, lost, won again. But none of it was told like a performance. It came out in fragments, as if he wasn't trying to impress her. He just wanted to be seen. And that, more than anything, made Rowena open her door to him. Have you ever fallen for someone who didn't fit your world, but made it feel like home? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. By the time he asked her to dinner, it didn't feel strange. It felt overdue. They sat at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. He asked her about her childhood, her favorite scent, what she believed happened after we die. She asked him why he seemed lonely in rooms full of people. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, because I built everything I thought I wanted, and none of it makes me feel anything. What do you want to feel? Safe. Rowena looked at him and didn't say a word, but the way her fingers wrapped around her water glass, gentle and firm, it felt like an answer. Their connection didn't happen in fireworks. It grew in quiet moments. Text messages that started with questions about art, but turned into late-night exchanges about childhood fears. Phone calls that went longer than planned. Evenings where he stopped by just to sit near her while she rearranged the gallery. Lucien didn't push. Rowena didn't rush. It felt like the kind of connection that didn't need proving. He introduced her to places that sparkled, high-rise lounges, private exhibits, foundations she never knew existed. But even in those glamorous settings, she noticed something unexpected. He always kept one hand on her back, as if to anchor himself. Rowena, in turn, brought him to places that breathed, old bookstores, botanical walks. Her favorite lunch spot tucked behind a florist's shop where the chairs didn't match. They were opposites in every visible way, but their opposites didn't clash. They blended. When Lucien asked her to marry him, it wasn't on a stage or at a crowded restaurant. It was on a Tuesday evening in her gallery, just before closing. He had come to pick her up for dinner. Instead, he walked in, locked the door behind him, and handed her a frame. Inside was a small sketch, just charcoal lines. An unfinished woman sitting beneath a tree, her head tilted upward, eyes closed. The caption beneath it was handwritten. Untied stillness. 2. Her throat tightened. There wasn't a sequel, she whispered. Now there is, he said. If you want one. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring. Simple, elegant, nothing flashy. Rowena Hale. Will you marry me? She didn't cry. She didn't make a speech. She just nodded and smiled like someone who had finally exhaled. They married 4 months later. The ceremony was held in the courtyard of a historic inn, under hanging lights and ivy-covered walls. Only a handful of people were invited. No press, no business partners, no publicists. Lucien wore a dark gray suit. Rowena wore a sleeveless ivory gown with a sash of blue at the waist, her mother's ribbon stitched into the fabric. He cried when he saw her. Really cried. Not politely, but with his whole face. He held her hands like they were the only safe thing he had ever touched. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Rowena felt something shift inside her, a feeling she hadn't had in years, security. Their first year together was quiet but meaningful. He traveled often, but made time for her. She continued to run the gallery, but spent weekends with him exploring homes near the water. They cooked together on Sundays. He burned toast every time. She didn't mind. He bought her flowers without occasion. She left notes in his suit pockets, little quotes about loyalty and calmness. They weren't perfect, but they weren't pretending to be. Lucien still had moments where he withdrew, like a man retreating into a vault, but Rowena never pushed. She believed people bloomed when given space, not pressure. Besides, she was patient. The topic of children came up over breakfast one morning. He was flipping through a newspaper, she was making tea. Would you want a boy or a girl? He asked casually, not looking up. I'd want someone who felt safe being exactly who they are, she replied. He smiled at that. But if you had to choose a girl, I'd name her Marin. Lucien paused. What about 2? Rowena's face lit up. Twins. Maybe. A boy and a girl. Marin and, what? Silas, she whispered. Marin and Silas. Sounds like a painting. She turned back to the kettle, hiding the tears that had pooled without warning. Not sadness. Just the kind of yearning that sits quietly behind hope. They tried. Not immediately, but not long after that morning. At first it was filled with excitement, plans, vitamins, schedules. But when it didn't happen, Rowena didn't panic. She just adjusted, tried again and again. Lucien was supportive, at least at the start. He told her it would happen when it was meant to. He held her hand through appointments. He whispered encouragement during injections. But over time, something shifted. He smiled less when she brought up new treatments. He stayed longer on business trips. And when she cried, quietly, always quietly, he grew quiet too. But not the comforting kind, the distant kind. Still, Rowena believed, not because she was naive, but because love to her meant continuing. Even when it hurt, even when it asked more than it gave. Rowena was the kind of woman who kept her pain folded neatly. She didn't cry in front of the nurses. She didn't break down during blood work. Instead, she wore soft sweaters to her appointments and thanked everyone by name. Lucien usually came with her, in the beginning. He'd squeeze her hand in the waiting room, joke about the outdated magazines, text his assistant under the table, then apologize for doing it. But as the months stretched on, his presence grew less consistent. Always a meeting, always a delay. "You don't need me there for every poke and prod," he said once. She gave a small smile. "No, I don't." But it wasn't about need, it was about together. After their third failed IVF cycle, Rowena sat alone in their bedroom. Not crying, just quiet. Her body felt like a field that had been tilled too many times, aching, overworked, and still empty. Lucien walked in with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Let's take a break from all this," he said. "Just you and me for a while." Rowena nodded, but inside, her heart folded a little tighter. She had already signed the papers for one last round. The doctors had retrieved 3 embryos, 3 small chances, frozen, preserved, waiting. Lucien didn't ask about them. He didn't mention them at all. Instead, he changed the subject to a real estate project, a deal abroad, a new property in the works. He kissed her forehead that night like a man checking a box. And Rowena, too tired to explain what that kiss didn't feel like, just let her eyes close. The gallery became her sanctuary again. She threw herself into work, curated a new exhibit focused on fragility and form. Each piece told a story without needing to be explained. Customers noticed a shift in her. She was still kind, still graceful, but quieter than before. One evening, a client remarked, "Your new collection feels like grief." Rowena tilted her head, then said softly, "Or maybe acceptance." Lucien didn't attend the opening. He was overseas for meetings. He sent flowers, expensive ones, but no note. Rowena placed them in a simple glass vase and tucked them behind the front desk. She couldn't bear to have them near the art. At night, they still shared a bed. But their silences had changed. It wasn't the silence of comfort anymore. It was the silence of what now. He didn't ask if she wanted to try again. She didn't tell him she still prayed over the embryos. They both pretended that time would bring clarity, but time was only bringing distance. Rowena wasn't bitter. She understood grief. She understood retreat. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't name at the time, was the shape of disbelief growing quietly in her chest. That somewhere, without her knowing, something precious was already being taken from her. She went to her doctor alone, just to ask a question, just to see if there was still a path forward. The receptionist greeted her kindly. The same nurse took her blood pressure. The same hallway. The same room. But something about the atmosphere had shifted. The tone. The eyes. "Everything all right?" Rowena asked. "Of course," the nurse replied. Too quickly. She brushed it off at the time. Told herself she was imagining things. That maybe they were just busy. She didn't press. Instead, she walked home, hands deep in her coat pockets, heart doing its best to stay open. That night, she opened the small wooden box where the embryo paperwork was kept. 3 names. 3 possibilities. Still there. Still safe. Or so she thought. Some nights, she whispered to them, those little flickers of possibility. "I haven't given up on you," she'd murmur. "I don't know when, but I'll come back for you." Lucien never heard her. He was already asleep, or away, or somewhere she couldn't reach. She still wore her wedding ring, still answered when he called, but something in her had shifted. Not in anger, not in blame, in distance, a quiet distance, the kind you don't feel until the echo comes back slower than before. Charleston's winter came without warning, not with snow or storm, but with a hush, the kind of chill that crept into your collarbones and made you speak less. Rowena had become quieter too. She still opened the gallery, still returned calls, still smiled when customers complimented her selections, but everything she did felt like she was moving through water. She was now 6 months past their last IVF cycle. The 3 embryos remained frozen, waiting for her to be ready, waiting for her body to feel like home again. But readiness wasn't physical anymore. It had become emotional. And truthfully, she didn't know if Lucien was still with her in that hope. He traveled often now. Meetings in Berlin, conferences in Toronto, dinners with partners in New York. Rowena had stopped asking for details, not because she didn't care, but because his answers had started sounding like schedules, not conversations. "I'll be back Thursday, late. It's just overnight. You don't have to wait up." Sometimes she didn't, sometimes she did. Lights off, eyes open, wondering if he still saw her the same way. She sat on the bathroom floor one morning, knees pulled up, pregnancy test beside her like a final period at the end of a sentence. Negative. Again. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She had reached a point where even her tears felt used up. She reached for her phone and texted Lucien a simple, "It didn't work." He replied 4 hours later, "I'm sorry. I know how much you wanted this. Not we. You." She stared at the screen for a full minute, then turned it over. She wasn't angry. She was quiet again. Later that day, she sat down at her desk and opened her journal. She hadn't written in weeks, but today, something pushed her hand. Rowena's monologue, diary format. "I am exhausted. Not from the shots, not from the blood tests, not even from the waiting. I am tired of feeling like a problem no one knows how to solve. I miss him, but I don't know if I miss the man beside me, or the man who used to hold me like I was enough, even when my body failed. 3 embryos, 3 chances, still frozen, still untouched. I don't know what hurts more, that I'm not ready, or that I don't think he is either. Today, the nurse said my numbers look good. I nodded. I even thanked her, but I can't tell if I believe anything anymore. I'm not giving up. I won't, but I'm scared I'll be the only one left waiting at the door." The next evening, Lucien returned home just after 9 p.m. His shoulders looked heavy and his tie hung loose around his collar. He placed his briefcase down and loosened his shoes without a word. Rowena brought him a glass of water. He thanked her without looking up. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive. Did you see the email from the clinic? They said, 'Let's not tonight, okay?'" Rowena paused. "Okay." She nodded and returned to the kitchen, holding the edge of the counter just to steady herself. Lucien didn't notice. They ate in silence. She lit candles, more out of habit than romance. He checked his phone twice during dinner. She refilled his glass once. There was no fight, no raised voice, but something inside Rowena felt like it was slowly closing its own door. And when they lay in bed that night, Lucien asleep before she'd even settled into her pillow, Rowena turned toward the window, eyes open, blinking into the dark. She was still hopeful, but hope had begun to feel heavier than grief. Lucien always said he didn't like public events. Too loud, too staged, too much noise, not enough meaning, but he still showed up to them. That's where decisions were made. Partnerships, funding, access. It was at one of those high-end gatherings, sleek, polished, and full of whispered networking, that he first noticed her. Callista Rain. She wasn't loud, but she knew how to be seen. She wore a deep green dress that matched her eyes, hair swept back, laughter timed perfectly. She didn't move like someone trying to impress. She moved like someone used to being watched. They were introduced through a mutual acquaintance. She smiled, tilted her head slightly, and said, "You're Lucien Maddox. I've seen your work. Work's just code and contracts. You're probably thinking of someone else." "No," she said. "I know power when I see it." That was the first line. It wasn't bold, but it stayed with him. Callista wasn't like Rowena. Where Rowena moved gently, Callista made space. Where Rowena asked questions, Callista offered affirmations. Where Rowena looked through people, Callista looked at them like they were the only thing that mattered in the room. She wasn't smarter. She wasn't wiser, but she knew timing. Lucien had walked into that room tired, unfulfilled, quietly ashamed of the way things had gone with Rowena. The silence, the failed attempts, the widening distance. Callista gave him no grief, no questions, no expectations, only understanding. "I followed your interviews," she said later that night. "People mistake vision for ego, but I think you've just outgrown rooms that can't hold you." That was the second line. Flattery, maybe, but precisely the kind he hadn't heard in months. They started having coffee, then drinks. Nothing physical, not at first. It was conversation, vulnerability disguised as strategy. She asked about his childhood, his ambition, his fears about legacy. And he told her, not everything, but enough. He told her about Rowena's heartbreak, about the failed attempts, about how love had slowly become quiet, heavy. "She's a beautiful soul," he said once, "but I don't know if she sees me anymore." Callista didn't offer advice. She offered presence. She wasn't aggressive. She didn't suggest anything, but she asked questions at the right time. "Do you want children?" Do you still believe in family? What would you do differently if you had another shot? And Lucian, burdened with guilt he didn't want to name, began to imagine what a new beginning could look like. A cleaner one. One without complications or injections or words left unsaid. Callista never claimed to love him. What she offered was simpler, a shared desire. She had aged out of the runway, but was still highly followed. She knew her visibility had an expiration date. Her partnerships, her branding deals, her invitations, they came with conditions. She didn't want romance. She wanted security. And Lucian? Lucian wanted an heir. It started with an idea, a passing comment. You know, it doesn't have to be that hard anymore, Callista said over dinner. People build families in different ways now. Lucian nodded. You mean adoption? She shrugged. Or you have embryos. You told me once. His fork paused midair. That's off the table. Why? Because they're not just mine, but you are the one who wants a child. And if she's not using them, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Lucian didn't respond, but he didn't shut it down either. That night, he didn't sleep. Not because of guilt, because of the possibility. A child, his name, his legacy, something lasting, something to pass on. He had spent his entire life building things. What was the point if it all ended with him? Callista waited, not long. And when Lucian called her a week later, voice quiet but firm, she didn't act surprised. She simply said, I know someone. Overseas. It can be done discreetly. He didn't tell Rowena. He didn't mention the consultation, or the forms, or the trip. All he told himself was, she's already let go. I'm just accepting it. The paperwork was written in careful legal language. It referenced a jointly created biological sample, an authorization for implantation via third-party gestational carrier. It even included a clause for international discretion, buried in the final pages. But what it didn't have was Rowena's signature. That didn't stop it from being submitted. Lucian had influence. Enough to get the right people to look away, enough to get the wrong people to keep quiet, enough to ensure that no phone call would ever reach Rowena. Her name was on the file, but her voice had been erased. The clinic was based in a private facility outside the country, clean, modern, with a reputation for protecting its clients. The embryo was selected, the surrogate prepped, the transfer done. Lucian didn't go to the procedure. Callista did. She wore sunglasses and a silk scarf, nodding politely to the staff, thanking them by name, smiling softly when she was called the mother. And afterward, as they waited for confirmation, she rested her head on Lucian's shoulder and said, We're starting something beautiful. Lucian didn't respond. He wasn't thinking about beauty. He was thinking about control, about closing a chapter, even if he had to seal it shut himself. Meanwhile, Rowena made tea in silence. She had begun taking morning walks again, trying to return her body to a rhythm. She'd stopped looking at baby clothes online, stopped tracking her cycle, but she hadn't let go of the embryos. She still whispered to them, still told them she wasn't done hoping. Not yet, she said aloud one morning, watching steam rise from her mug. I'm not ready to let go of you. Not yet. The call came 6 weeks later. Lucian had stepped out during dinner, some excuse about a message from Europe. Rowena continued eating alone, unaware that thousands of miles away, Callista had just received the news. It worked. She was pregnant. Lucian returned home with takeout and said nothing. He kissed Rowena's cheek and asked about her day. She told him about a new artist she was showcasing, a young woman, who painted grief using layered fabric and ashes from burnt paper. He nodded along, smiled in the right places, even offered to visit the opening. But inside, he was already somewhere else, already building a future that excluded her. 3 months later, a tabloid photo was posted online. Callista exiting a wellness center, holding her stomach. The caption read, Social media star sparks pregnancy rumors. Lucian called her immediately. That wasn't the agreement. Relax, she said. It's just a hint, no confirmation. You're not even mentioned. But the seed had been planted. And when the due date got closer, Callista's subtle presence began to sharpen. More appearances, more strategic placement, more quiet acknowledgement that something was coming. Lucian tried to control the narrative. He instructed his publicist to prepare a statement. He considered buying silence, but there was one variable he hadn't planned for: Rowena. It was a Tuesday morning when she saw the headline. It was a photo, one that would fracture everything. Lucian standing beside Callista. Callista holding a newborn wrapped in cream fabric, and between them, a child, tiny, pink-skinned, eyes wide open, amber hazel eyes, with a single fleck under the left iris. Rowena's mug hit the floor. The shatter didn't even register. She stared at the screen, not in anger, not in sorrow, in recognition. That child wasn't just familiar. That child was hers. She didn't scream. She didn't call Lucian. She didn't throw anything. She walked into her bedroom, opened the drawer that held the embryo documents, pulled them out. 3 names, 3 codes, still marked as frozen. But now, she knew, one was missing. The fertility clinic had changed ownership just 6 months before Lucian made the call. It was a discreet facility, known for serving the elite, clients who valued privacy more than process. It wasn't the place you found by accident. You had to know someone. You had to be sent. Lucian didn't walk in through the front door. He arranged a meeting with the director directly, a man who knew how to keep questions off the record. Lucian brought 2 documents. One was real, his signature, his identification, his intent. The other was forged, a printed scan of Rowena's consent form with her name attached to it. The director asked only one question: "Are both parties aware?" Lucian held his breath for just half a second. She has no objections. The lie was clean, unemotional, and that was all it took. An international surrogate was selected within 2 weeks. She had no direct contact with Lucian or Callista. Everything was handled through attorneys, intermediaries, encrypted messaging. No corners were cut. Every form was filed. Every step was legal on paper. But truth wasn't in the paperwork. It was in what had been taken. While Rowena spent her mornings organizing exhibits and tending to her small rooftop garden, a life she had longed for was already forming in someone else's body. A child that was biologically hers, without her knowledge, without her choice. Lucian visited Callista privately once a month. He didn't hold her hand or stroke her belly. He wasn't that sentimental. He saw the pregnancy the way he saw a contract, something progressing along a timeline. Callista, meanwhile, reveled in the spotlight. Not overtly. She didn't post ultrasound photos or baby shoes, but she allowed herself to be seen in the right circles. She wore soft fabrics that clung in the right places. She touched her stomach at just the right angle when paparazzi were nearby. And she smiled every time someone whispered, "She's glowing." The child was born on a Friday. A boy, healthy, 6 pounds, 10 ounces, dark hair, long fingers, and eyes that opened wide, immediately. Lucian was not present in the delivery room. He arrived the next day with a quiet nod and an envelope for the hospital administrator. They named him Silas. No middle name, no hyphenated surname. Just Silas Maddox. Lucian's team issued a carefully written statement to a media contact he trusted. It explained that Lucian Maddox, having privately separated from his wife due to prolonged fertility challenges, had chosen to pursue fatherhood through alternative means. The mother was named as Callista Rain, a friend, now partner, who had supported him through a difficult chapter. The press spun it as a quiet, classy evolution, a man reclaiming joy after heartbreak. The comments were supportive. The articles praised his strength and emotional maturity. No one asked about Rowena. No one even mentioned her. She found out the way strangers do, through a screen. It wasn't the headline that stopped her. It was the photograph. Lucian, standing tall, holding the newborn in his arms. Callista, seated, smiling faintly. And the baby, looking straight into the camera lens, eyes wide, unblinking, amber with a fleck beneath the left iris. Rowena gasped before she even realized sound had left her. Her hands went cold. Her knees locked. The phone slipped from her fingers onto the hardwood floor. The screen cracked, but the image remained. Still there, still looking at her. Her breath came in sharp, uneven pulses. She reached for the kitchen counter. Missed. Her body didn't fall. It collapsed. The next hours were blurry. She lay on the floor, eyes open, unmoving. She didn't call anyone. Didn't scream. She just stared, not at the phone, not even at the wall. She stared into space, trying to remember the last time she had felt her embryos were safe, trying to remember when Lucien stopped asking her how she felt, trying to piece together the moments she'd ignored, the late-night texts, the subtle deflections, the nurse's strange tone at her last visit. Everything had been right there, just out of reach. When she finally rose, her legs were stiff and unsteady. Her hands shook as she pulled out the old wooden box where she kept the fertility documents. 3 embryos. 3. She flipped through the forms. There it was. Her name, Lucien's name, the codes, all still marked as preserved, still listed as frozen, except they weren't. One of them wasn't. She pulled out a pen and circled the number. Her fingers dug through her drawer until she found the business card her attorney had once given her during a fundraiser years ago. She dialed the number without hesitating. "This is Rowena Hale," she said, voice low but clear. "I need to know if it's legal for someone to use your DNA without telling you." The lawyer she called was discreet and sharp, a friend of her late father, is known in Charleston for handling cases others were too afraid to touch. Rowena didn't cry during their meeting. She didn't even blink too much. She just placed the photo on the desk, then the documents, and then she asked, "Can you help me prove that I never gave permission?" The lawyer didn't respond immediately. He studied the forms, then looked up. "Do you have the originals?" "Every copy I was ever given." "Good, because someone else has copies that don't match yours." The investigation began that week. Quietly, her legal team contacted the clinic, posing as researchers looking into procedural ethics around embryo custody. It was enough to initiate a review without raising suspicion. What they found was intentional. Documents with altered dates, signatures that resembled hers, but not quite. Digital consent forms she'd never seen. Someone had forged her name. Not once, not in passing, but repeatedly, deliberately, and not one person inside the clinic had flagged it, because no one wanted to lose the kind of money Lucien Maddox could offer. Rowena sat alone in her living room, scrolling through the PDF files sent by her lawyer. One by one, she saw her name attached to things she never said. "I authorize. I consent. I release." The words felt like bruises. She was staring at a digital theft of her body, disguised as paperwork. And worse, no one had told her. Not the clinic, not the doctors, not the man who had once placed a hand over her stomach and whispered, "We'll get there." Her lawyer leaned forward during their third meeting. "We have enough, not just to press charges, but to change the narrative entirely. I don't care about headlines," she said. "What do you care about?" She looked out the window. The truth, and him. "Lucien?" "No," she said. "Silas." They filed a petition in court, not just for damages, but for custody. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about connection. Silas had come from her body, her blood, her cells. He had been created out of hope and used as leverage in someone else's ambition. Lucien had stolen a future meant to be shared and turned it into something selfish. What would you do if someone you trusted stole part of you and made a life without telling you? Would you fight back or walk away? Let us know in the comments, because what Rowena chose next wasn't easy. But it was right. Word spread faster than Lucien expected. When the legal documents were filed, they became public record, and it didn't take long for a journalist to catch the story. The first article appeared 3 days later. Court filing accuses Lucien Maddox of using frozen embryo without consent. A ripple, then another. Mother seeks custody of child born through unauthorized IVF use. Then came the silence, Lucien's silence. He didn't respond to media requests. He didn't post. He didn't appear in public. Callista went even quieter. Her pages stopped updating. Her comments were turned off, because this wasn't just about moral failure anymore. It was a legal one, a biological one. A mother had been cut out of her own story, and now she was stepping back in. Rowena received hate mail, accusations, people calling her bitter, envious, unfit. But there were others too. Messages from women she'd never met. "Thank you for fighting. You're doing what some of us couldn't. He's lucky to have a mother like you." Through it all, she remained composed, not stoic, not cold, focused. There were moments she cried, usually alone, after long legal meetings, or late at night when a lullaby commercial came on. But even her tears felt purposeful now, Because this wasn't just about grief. It was about correction. It was about telling the truth in a world that had tried to erase her. The courtroom wasn't packed. There were no flashing lights or loud voices, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Lucien sat with his legal team, posture stiff, jaw tight. He wore a navy suit that once signaled dominance, but now clung to a man trying to hold together a version of himself that had already begun to crack. Rowena sat across from him. Her expression didn't shift, not when his lawyers questioned the timeline, not when they attempted to dismiss the DNA results as technically accurate, but circumstantially misleading, not even when Callista's written statement was read aloud, a cold, transaction-based description of her involvement. She sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, as if her very stillness was speaking for her. Because it was. The judge reviewed the documentation, every falsified signature, every legal discrepancy, every timeline that didn't match. There was no denying the truth. The embryo had been used without Rowena's knowledge. Her signature had been forged. Her child had been carried to term while she was kept in the dark. The DNA test was simple, clean, 99.9% match. The courtroom fell silent as it was submitted into evidence. Lucien didn't look at her. Not once. After the day's proceedings, Rowena walked outside, where a few photographers had gathered. She didn't stop for them. A reporter called out, "Miss Hale, are you seeking financial damages?" She didn't answer. Another voice asked, "Do you have anything to say to Lucien Maddox?" She paused, just briefly, then said quietly, "I'm not here for him. I'm here for my son." Then she got into the waiting car and closed the door. Inside the boardrooms of Lucien's empire, panic had begun. Investors pulled out. Brand partners severed ties. A leaked memo from inside his company used words like ethical breach and loss of trust. Stocks fell. Meetings were canceled. Internal emails circulated phrases like irreparable reputation. Harm. The very thing Lucien had built, based on vision, ambition, calculated control, was now the thing slipping through his fingers. And the irony? He still didn't fully grasp why. His assistant found him in his office days later, alone in the dark. "You have court again tomorrow," she said. He nodded. "Do you want to prepare a statement?" "There's nothing left to say." She hesitated at the door. "You should call her." He didn't respond. In court, Rowena's lawyer made a final plea. Not for punishment, not for a payout, but for something deeper. "My client is not here to destroy Mr. Maddox. She is not here to shame the woman involved. She is here because a child, her child, was taken from her through deceit. She did not abandon her embryos. She did not sign away her rights. She was robbed of choice. And now she is choosing to stand up, not just for herself, but for the life she brought into this world." The courtroom remained still. Rowena was awarded full parental rights. Lucien was stripped of legal custody. The court ruled that due to fraudulent acquisition, all prior agreements were null. Callista had no claim. She had previously waived any guardianship in exchange for financial compensation. Silas, the child born out of betrayal, was now fully, legally, and wholly Rowena's. Later that night, Rowena stood in her quiet home, a box on the table in front of her. Inside were the last pieces of her life with Lucien. Photos, letters, a copy of their wedding vows. She placed them one by one into the box. Not with anger, not with grief, with peace. She didn't need to burn it. She didn't need to make a statement. She was simply closing a door, one she had once held open with hope, even when she stood there alone. A week later, her lawyer delivered a letter from Lucien. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't begging. It simply said, "I know I lost everything, but the only thing I regret is how quietly I let you go." She folded the letter once, slid it into a drawer, and walked outside where the early evening light touched the edges of her garden. She breathed in and didn't look back. Inside her home, the nursery had already been painted. Soft greens, a mobile above the crib made from tiny watercolor birds, a rocking chair in the corner where she had once imagined feeding her baby long before she knew his name. Now, it wasn't a dream. It was real. Silas would be home soon, and when he was old enough to ask, she would tell him the truth, not the shameful version, but the whole one, that he came from strength, that his mother waited, that love, when rooted in truth, can reclaim anything, even what was stolen. Rowena never wanted a fight. But some battles come looking for you, not with fists but with documents. She arrived at her lawyer's office wearing a simple black turtleneck and dark jeans. No makeup, no performance, just focus. They had gathered everything. Medical records, original signature samples, archived communication logs, surveillance timestamps from the clinic. Her attorney gestured toward a file. These, he said, don't just prove forgery, they prove premeditation. Lucian hadn't simply taken a shortcut. He had constructed a system of silence and paid others to maintain it. The law firm began drafting the suit that same week. It was structured in 3 parts. 1, 2, 3. Fraudulent use of biological material, forgery of legal consent, documents, intentional, emotional, and reproductive harm. Rowena reviewed every word. She didn't rush. She didn't edit. She simply said, "This must never happen to another woman again." That became the foundation. Not revenge, correction. To strengthen the case, they needed one final piece: irrefutable, scientific truth. Rowena's lawyer hired an independent lab across state lines, a private service known for handling disputed parentage cases quietly. She provided her sample. It took minutes. What followed were the longest 10 days of her life. Each morning she woke up, brewed her tea, and checked her inbox. Nothing, until the 11th day. The subject line read, "Parentage confirmation, final report." She opened it. Her hands didn't shake this time. She scrolled to the results. Probability of maternity, 99.998%. No further interpretation was needed. Silas was hers. Undeniably, legally, scientifically. Her heart didn't leap. It settled, like a truth that had finally arrived home. She forwarded the report to her legal team. They didn't reply with fanfare. Just one message from her lawyer. "We begin." Over the next 4 weeks, her lawyers moved through the system with quiet precision. They filed motions, contacted expert witnesses, requested official statements from the fertility clinic staff under subpoena. The receptionist confessed first, nervously, but honestly. "We were told the forms were just outdated backups." He said his wife had already agreed. The director gave a more polished statement, but under pressure admitted there was an understanding that confidentiality was more important than due diligence. The pieces were falling into place. Truth didn't need to shout. It just needed a stage. Lucian, meanwhile, was in damage control mode. He had been silent online for weeks, but after catching wind of the legal filings, his team scrambled to contain the leak. His publicist issued a short statement. "This is a private family matter. We ask for compassion as personal details are resolved." But compassion was already gone. The public didn't like lies, especially the kind that involved family, power, and betrayal. The story broke in the local press first, then syndicated news picked it up. Charleston woman claims biological son was born without her consent. Court filing accuses tech executive of reproductive fraud. DNA test confirms child's maternity amid scandal. The headlines weren't written to shock. They were written with restraint, which made them hit even harder. Social media followed. Rowena's name trended for 2 days straight, not because of drama, but because of empathy. Women across platforms began sharing their own experiences. Frozen embryos, never used lost pregnancies, broken trust with partners and medical systems. Rowena became a symbol, not of sadness, but of quiet strength. Lucien tried to get ahead of it. He arranged for a one-on-one interview with a business columnist he trusted, a conversation where he could explain his side. He arrived on set, clean-cut, well-dressed, and visibly tired. The reporter asked the first question gently. "Why didn't you tell her?" Lucien's answer was calculated. "At the time, I believed she had moved on emotionally, that she wasn't going to pursue motherhood anymore." The reporter didn't push, but the public did. Clips were reposted with comments like, "You believed. You didn't ask." She was still healing, not disappearing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. Lucien's name didn't carry the weight it used to. In her quiet home, Rowena sat with the DNA report folded in her lap. She stared at it, not as proof of victory, but as proof of life. He was real. He was hers. And he deserved to know what love built with consent, trust, and presence looked like. She wasn't after control. She was after clarity. And now, she was ready to file for full custody. The petition was filed on a Thursday morning. It named Rowena Hale as the biological mother. It included the DNA report, the chain of forged documents, affidavits from clinic staff, and most importantly, it included a simple, clear request: full legal custody of Silas Maddox. No shared arrangement, no visitation, no mediation. She wasn't asking to negotiate. She was drawing a boundary. Lucien's legal team received the filing by courier. The packet was thick, evidence perfectly indexed, exhibits marked. When he opened it, the only paper that seemed to catch his attention was the cover letter. Your client is being offered the opportunity to surrender custody voluntarily. If declined, we will proceed to trial. Lucien dropped the packet on the table. She wants war, his attorney replied calmly. She wants her child. Behind closed doors, Lucien began scrambling. He tried calling Rowena. No answer. He left a voicemail. We don't have to do it this way. I thought you were done trying. You never said you wanted them. He deleted the second message he recorded. Too defensive. He never sent a third. Rowena, meanwhile, met with a therapist. Not to grieve, but to prepare. I want to be centered, she said. If I win, I don't want to bring bitterness into my son's life. They worked through scripts. How to talk to a child born under complicated circumstances. How to help him grow without secrets, but also without shame. She took notes. Lucien's press team tried to soften his image. A carefully edited photo was released, him walking into a building, holding Silas. The caption read, Father first, Maddox seen with son amid ongoing legal dispute. But the public was no longer listening. His name was now attached to something that couldn't be softened, a violation that struck too close to too many. Investors began asking questions. He lost a speaking engagement, then a board seat, then a deal he had been working on for over a year. None of it collapsed loudly. It just slipped away. Rowena, meanwhile, was building. She met with a family law advocate about child integration. She converted the guest room into a nursery, not pink, not blue, but soft whites and wood. She wrote letters to Silas, short, honest, full of love. She didn't tell him everything. But she didn't lie. One day I'll explain it all. For now, I just want you to feel safe. You are not a mistake. You are not the result of betrayal. You are a child born from my hope, and I'm coming for you. Lucien filed a counter motion. His lawyers argued that while the method of conception was unethical, the child had now bonded with him, and it would be destabilizing to remove him. Rowena's legal team responded swiftly. Mr. Maddox did not bond. He hid. He used deception to create a child, then built a life without the mother's knowledge. His current attachment does not erase the theft. The hearing date was set, 2 months from the filing. Rowena didn't mark it with fear. She circled the date in her planner, then underlined it twice. She began preparing for motherhood, not performatively, not to prove anything, just practically. She registered for parenting classes, met with a child psychologist, reviewed routines and bonding techniques, not to impress the court, to honor the moment. Across town, Lucien stared at an empty office. His executive assistant had resigned. His calendar was nearly blank. His calls weren't returned as quickly. He opened his laptop and watched an old interview he had done, a conversation about leadership, legacy, vision. He didn't recognize the man speaking, because that man hadn't needed to lie to feel powerful. Now, he was learning what it meant to be powerless in the face of a truth too large to contain. Rowena didn't check headlines anymore. She didn't need public sympathy. She didn't even want it. Her focus was singular Silas, the child she carried in her heart before she even knew his name, the one she still whispered to at night, not with sadness, but with promise. You don't know me yet, but you will, and when you do, you'll understand what truth feels like. It's quiet, but it doesn't go away. The courtroom was quieter than expected. No press row, no overflow, just the parties, their attorneys, and a single bailiff near the door. Rowena arrived early, not to prepare, she had already done that, but to breathe. She wore soft gray and minimal jewelry. Her hair was pulled back, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. She didn't need to be seen. She just needed to be present. Lucien arrived 2 minutes before the hearing began. He looked older, not aged, just worn. He gave her a single glance. She didn't return it. The judge entered, and silence settled like dust. Opening statements were short. The facts were already on record. embryos created during marriage, unauthorized use, forged documents, maternity, confirmed through independent lab custodial motion filed with supporting evidence. Lucian's attorney argued for shared custody. My client acknowledges the mistakes made, but he has raised this child. He has provided, protected, and bonded with him. The child sees him as his primary parent. Rowena's lawyer stood. This is not about technical bonding. This is about the right of a mother to know when her child exists, about the right of a woman to have control over her body, even when that body is used in absence. There was no need to dramatize it. Truth, when laid bare, doesn't need volume. The judge called a brief recess to review the final set of documents. Rowena waited in the hallway, sipping from a paper cup of water. Her lawyer stood nearby but didn't speak. She didn't ask what would happen. She didn't run through possibilities. She simply closed her eyes and repeated 3 words to herself. I showed up. Back inside, the decision was read without hesitation. Custody will be granted in full to Miss Rowena Hale. Mr. Maddox is not awarded visitation or shared legal rights. This court finds that the child in question was conceived and brought to term through unauthorized use of biological material belonging to Miss Hale, and that the child's welfare would be best served under her sole care moving forward. Lucian didn't speak. Rowena didn't react outwardly. She just let her breath settle, let her shoulders relax, let the silence say what words couldn't. Afterward, Lucian walked past her without stopping, but just before reaching the exit, he turned. His voice was quiet. I hope you tell him good things about me. Rowena looked up, steady. I'll tell him the truth. He nodded once, and then he was gone. Rowena stood on the steps outside, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun. Her attorney handed her a document, the final ruling, embossed with the court seal. She folded it gently and placed it in her purse. Not as a trophy, as evidence that when truth is walked out patiently, it holds. She didn't announce the decision to the world. She didn't post a statement, didn't do interviews. She went home, opened the door to the nursery, and sat in the rocker by the window, the one she had picked out months earlier. For a few minutes, she didn't move. Then she leaned back and smiled. 1 week later, Silas arrived. He was brought by court-appointed guardians who had been overseeing his care during the proceedings. When Rowena opened the door, he blinked at her quietly. He was smaller than she remembered from the photos, more alert, more aware. She didn't reach for him. She knelt instead. Hi, she said. I'm your mama. He didn't speak, but his gaze stayed fixed. She held out her hands. He leaned in, not rushed, not afraid. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. That night, she held him against her chest while he slept, and for the first time in years, her body didn't feel broken. It didn't feel stolen. It felt complete, not because the pain had disappeared, but because something real had finally taken its place. Truth doesn't shout, it waits, and when it's time, it doesn't ask for attention, it asks for courage. Eland Rowan arrived without warning, not in Rowena's life, but in the room where her lawyer had requested help gathering digital forensics during the early stages of the case. She barely noticed him at first. He was quiet, methodical, with a presence that didn't demand attention, but her attorney spoke highly of him. Former fire captain, turned investigator, lost his wife a few years back, doesn't say much, but he sees everything. At the time, Rowena had no capacity to care about anyone new. Her world was a schedule of court dates and documents, but Elin showed up, on time, prepared, respectful, never asked personal questions, never inserted opinion, just did his job, thoroughly. Weeks after the verdict, when custody had been granted and her house was no longer silent, she received a package at her door. It was from Eland. Inside was a slim flash drive and a handwritten note. Thought you might want the files for your own records. No rush, no expectations, no signature. Just his initials, sir. She smiled faintly and set it aside. She didn't open it that day. But 2 nights later, while Silas slept in the next room, and the hum of her quiet home made her chest ache with unfamiliar stillness, she clicked the folder open. Every document, every photo, every timeline, organized, neat, dated, easy to follow. At the bottom of the folder was an audio file labeled only Silas, full truth. For when he's ready. 3 days later, Rowena sent an email. Thank you. That last file, It was more than I expected. I'm grateful, Eland replied with one line. He deserved to have his story kept safe. They didn't talk often at first, but when they did, it was never small talk. Eland didn't ask how she was doing. He asked if she'd eaten, if Silas was sleeping well, if her garden still bloomed. He was a man who paid attention to the quiet things. And Rowena, who had spent months fighting for the loud truths, found comfort in his stillness. They met for coffee one morning. A simple request, no expectations. He brought her chamomile with a slice of lemon. Didn't ask if that's what she wanted, just somehow knew. They sat by a window, watched people pass, spoke only when words felt worth speaking. You said you lost your wife, she murmured. He nodded. Cancer. 6 years ago. How did you survive that kind of absence? Eland didn't rush to answer. I didn't try to fill the silence. I let it stay. Eventually it turned into peace. Rowena looked out the window, her hand tightening around the warm cup. I don't know what this part of life is supposed to feel like. He shrugged slightly. Maybe it's not supposed to feel like anything yet. Maybe it's just meant to be quiet. She didn't respond, but for the first time in a long time, she felt okay not knowing. Eland didn't ask to come over. He offered, gently, I can help set up the new crib if you need another pair of hands. Rowena hesitated. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. She just wasn't used to accepting help, but she nodded. Sure, that would be nice. He arrived with his sleeves rolled and his toolbox tucked under one arm. No expectations, no questions, just steady hands and quiet focus. Rowena watched from the doorway as he worked, Silas in her arms, fascinated by the soft rhythm of wood being fitted into place. You're good at this, she said. I used to build dollhouses with my wife. She loved the details. Rowena didn't speak for a while, but when she finally did, it wasn't about the crib. I never imagined being a mother like this. You're doing it, he said without looking up. Am the first? You're showing up every day. That's more than most. When he finished, Silas had fallen asleep in her arms. Rowena shifted him gently to her shoulder and whispered, Thank you. Eland picked up his toolbox and paused by the door. He trusts you already. You're his home. She didn't reply, but something in her chest settled. Over the next few weeks, they spoke more often, sometimes through text, sometimes through voice notes. Eland would send a photo of a garden he passed, a row of roses that reminded him of one she'd once mentioned. Rowena sent back a snapshot of Silas gripping a spoon for the first time, determination written across his tiny face. Their words weren't romantic. They were real, simple threads of connection, sewn one at a time. One evening she called, Do you have a moment? Always. I need help installing the baby monitor. On my way. He arrived with no fanfare, no assumption. Silas had just fallen asleep. Together, they adjusted the angle of the monitor above the crib, making sure no wires were visible. When they were done, they stood in the doorway, watching the small screen. Silas shifted in his sleep. Rowena whispered, Sometimes I stare just to remind myself this is real. He's real. You're real. This life you fought for, it's yours, Rowena. She looked at him, for the first time, really looked. How do you always know what to say? I don't. I just try not to say things that don't need to be said. Later, they stepped onto the balcony. Charleston's lights flickered gently in the distance. The air was warm. Still, they stood close, not touching, but near enough to feel the space shift. Do you ever think you'll love again? She asked. Eland took his time. I don't know. But I do believe in peace, and I think, when peace comes in the shape of a person, you don't question it. She nodded slowly. The silence returned. Not awkward, not uncertain. Comfortable. Then, as if guided by something quiet and mutual, she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stayed. And that was enough. That evening, Charleston felt still. The streets below hummed with life, but inside Rowena's home, everything was calm. Silas had fallen asleep early, worn out from a day of giggles, blocks, and blueberries. Rowena stood on her balcony, arms crossed gently over her chest. The breeze was soft. The light was low. Eland stepped out behind her, barefoot, carrying 2 mugs. Peppermint, he said, handing one to her. Helps settle the nerves. She took it with a small smile. You always know when I need something to settle. You don't hide it as well as you think. They sipped in silence for a moment. Below them, the city exhaled in lights and faint laughter. A saxophone played somewhere in the distance, lazy soft notes curling through the air like incense. Rowena spoke first. Sometimes I wonder how I'll explain everything to him one day, what words I'll use, how much I should leave out. Ayland looked ahead, not rushing her. You'll tell the truth, and the truth will be enough. But how do I say it without it sounding like pain? Say it the way you've lived it, quietly, completely, without anger. She let that settle, then whispered, You talk like someone who's had to forgive life for a lot. He smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned that love doesn't always come in the shape we expect. She turned to face him fully now, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug like it anchored her. You know what scares me most? What? That I could want something again. Someone. After all this time, after everything that was taken, the idea of wanting feels risky. He didn't move. It is. But it's also the beginning of living again. Rowena blinked slowly, then set her mug down on the railing. I'm not asking you to rescue me, Eland. Good. I don't want to rescue you. I just want to be here when you're ready to stop standing alone. He stepped a little closer, still not touching, still giving her space to breathe. You once said you weren't sure what this part of life was supposed to feel like, he said. Maybe it's not about knowing. Maybe it's just about noticing who stays when everything else has gone quiet. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. There was no tension, no pressure, only stillness and presence. She took a step forward. He didn't move. Her fingers brushed his, soft, unsure. He met them gently. Not a grab, not a pull, a response. Then with the kind of slowness that felt almost sacred, she leaned in. Not because she had to, but because it felt safe to. And their lips met. No urgency, no performance, just breath, just warmth, just the soft exchange of two people who had nothing to prove, but everything to offer. When they pulled apart, she didn't rush to speak. She let the quiet stay a little longer. Then she whispered, That didn't feel like a beginning. No? He asked, brows slightly raised. It felt like something I'd been walking toward for a long time, and finally arrived at. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him hold it. No fear, just trust. The next morning, Rowena woke to light pouring through the linen curtains. Silas was still asleep, and for once, there was no weight in her chest. No court date circled on the calendar. No headline to brace for. Just the quiet hum of a new day. She made coffee, folded laundry, watered her herbs. Simple things. Things that used to feel like filler. Now, they felt like life. Later, Elan knocked. Not too early, not too late. He carried a small paper bag and a book under his arm. Almond croissants, he said, not because you asked, just because they looked like something you'd reach for on a slow morning. She grinned. You're not wrong. They sat on the back patio. No music, no background noise, just birds, breeze, and the occasional laugh from Silas as he played nearby, wobbling with toddler bravery across the grass. Eland opened the book. A novel. One they'd spoken about weeks ago in passing. You remembered. I always remember the things people mention in between sentences. That's where truth hides. She looked at him then. Really looked. You're not trying to fix me, are you? No. I'm trying to walk beside you while you become exactly who you were meant to be. That evening, Silas brought over a small red toy and handed it to Eland. You trust me, little man? Eland asked softly. Silas nodded, then toddled back to his blocks. Rowena watched, hand over her mouth. He doesn't warm up easily, she whispered. He doesn't need to, Eland replied. He just knows what safe feels like. They had dinner together that night, something simple. Roasted vegetables, lemon chicken, peach slices for dessert. No declarations, no confessions, just presence. And as Rowena wiped Silas's hands clean and tucked him into bed, she paused at the doorway to look back. Eland stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes like he'd always belonged, and something clicked in her chest. Not a flutter, a knowing. Later, they stepped out onto the balcony again. No kiss this time, just standing, side by side. She spoke without looking at him. Do you think it's too soon to be this okay? It's not too soon, he said. It's just finally time. She reached for his hand again, the way you reach for the final piece of a story you didn't realize you were still writing. This time, she held on a little longer. Can two broken hearts heal each other? Have you ever found love in an unexpected place or time in your life? Let us know in the comments. We read every story shared because your voice matters here on Mr. Ross Story Trail. And if this moment touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Lucien arrived in court wearing a suit that no longer seemed to fit, not in size, in purpose. It hung on him like a costume, the uniform of a man pretending to be in control. He walked past reporters without answering questions. No more practiced smiles. No curated statements. Inside, Rowena sat calm, her legal team flanking her on both sides. She didn't glare at him. She didn't flinch when he entered. She simply looked forward, her eyes steady, her breath even. The courtroom wasn't the same one used for the custody hearing. This was a different case now. Civil, financial, public. Rowena had filed a suit for damages, not for money she needed, for precedent, for acknowledgement. The claim was clear: fraud, emotional harm, reproductive interference, defamation through misrepresentation. Lucien had fought it at first, but after the public fallout, his legal team encouraged him to settle quietly. Rowena refused. This isn't about headlines, she told her attorney. This is about truth being written in permanent ink. The evidence was laid out again, this time for a wider audience. Emails, the falsified consent, surrogacy contracts with redacted bank wires traced back to one of Lucien's subsidiaries. Each slide flicked across the courtroom projector like a stone tossed into water, the ripples spreading across every person present. Lucien stared at the floor. The judge listened, asked few questions. Read the report from the DNA lab once more. At the end of the first day, Lucien requested a recess to review terms of a possible settlement. Rowena left the room before he could look in her direction. That night, Lucien sat in his condo, the one overlooking the city skyline, now stripped of the art he'd once bragged about. His reflection stared back from the floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time, he looked small inside a space he once felt proud to own. The next morning, Rowena received a voicemail. She didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice, unmistakable. Rowena, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I thought I was building something that would outlast me. I just wanted a legacy. I didn't know how to fix us. And when I couldn't fix us, I tried to fix something else. I didn't expect it to hurt you like this. I didn't think you'd still be standing on the other side. Pause. But you are, and I see it now. You were the legacy, not the company, not the name. You. Rowena sat with the phone in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't save the message. She pressed delete, then walked into the nursery, where Silas was stacking wooden animals by color. She kissed the top of his head. Breakfast? He looked up and nodded. The world moved forward. In the following weeks, Lucien's business faced increasing pressure. A major investor backed out. A board member resigned. 2 partners pulled licensing rights to his software for ethical reasons. There was no explosive crash, just quiet detachment. 1 meeting canceled, then another, 1 article, then 4. The Maddox decline, when empire meets ethics. He released a vague statement about refocusing on personal matters. It didn't work. His brand, once synonymous with brilliance, now sat in a gray space. Too controversial for endorsements, too quiet to be respected. Meanwhile, Rowena avoided interviews. She declined a podcast, turned down a feature. My story already exists. I lived it. That's enough. Instead, she spent her time researching early childhood programs, planting new herbs on her windowsill, reading to Silas in the afternoon light. Her days were slow, but full. Callista Rain didn't make a public statement. There was no post, no video, no carefully lit farewell. She vanished like fog when the sun rises, slowly and then completely. Her social media accounts were deactivated. Her agent released a 1-line notice. Ms. Rain is stepping away from the public eye to focus on her personal well-being. But those who knew her said she'd been paid to disappear. Months earlier, she had signed documents waiving any claim to parental rights, a trade for a quiet deposit into an offshore account. At the time, she had smiled through the terms. It's not about being a mother, she had once told a friend at a boutique opening. It's about being remembered. But now, there was nothing left to remember her by. No brand deals, no modeling contracts, no interviews, and most importantly, No child. Lucian reached out once. A terse email. "Where are you?" There was no reply. He was alone. His condo, once filled with curated luxury, grew hollow. He sold the townhouse in London, liquidated 2 smaller properties in Miami and San Francisco. One of his investors leaked news of the civil judgment. Though the amount wasn't disclosed, the message was clear. Lucian had been found responsible, and he had paid. Quietly, but not quietly enough. He tried to schedule a meeting with one of his previous partners, a respected executive who had once offered him his first $1 million investment. The assistant replied, "We're not looking to reconnect at this time." Lucian stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't delete the message. He just shut the laptop. Across town, Rowena stood in her kitchen, sipping jasmine tea while Silas napped on the couch, a book still open on his chest. Her attorney called. "They've transferred the remaining funds. The paperwork is final." "And the custody terms?" "Locked, full, irrevocable." Rowena exhaled. "Thank you. You sure you don't want to pursue the additional claim? The therapist's report gives you ground." Rowena paused. "No, I've already won what matters." Later that day, she opened a small wooden box in her closet. Inside were old photos. One of her and Lucian, early on, at her gallery's opening night. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't feel anger. She didn't even feel regret. She just felt distance, as though the woman in the photo had been someone else, a version of herself still trying to make space for someone who never planned to stay. That evening she journaled, just one sentence. "Power isn't about being feared, it's about being free." Lucian's world kept shrinking. He canceled his appearance at a major tech conference. An executive recruiter dropped him from their board advisory list. His name stopped trending, but not because people forgot, because no one wanted to say it out loud anymore. He became that name you skip over in an article, the man companies quietly removed from press materials. He tried to launch a side venture, an app focused on legacy planning. It failed to meet pre-registration targets. Funding dried up before beta. In one of his final public appearances, he sat at the back of a foundation gala, no longer on stage, no longer at the donor table. He looked up once, caught the eye of someone across the room. They looked away. That night, he returned home to silence. No calls, no press releases, no child. He stood in his kitchen, staring at the fridge door. It was bare. No magnets, no family drawings, no photos. He placed his palm against the cool metal and whispered, "I had it all." But the room said nothing back. The final custody hearing wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no gasps from the courtroom, just calm. Lucian sat on one side of the room, shoulders tight, jaw set. Rowena sat on the other, hands folded, breath steady. Silas wasn't present. She didn't want him anywhere near the courthouse. Instead, he was home, building towers out of wooden blocks under Elon's careful watch. The judge reviewed the documents. Parental rights were previously assigned to the petitioner's spouse via unauthorized use of genetic material, verified through DNA testing, reviewed by both independent and court-appointed analysts. Lucian stared at the table. Given the evidence and the emotional, legal, and medical precedents, full legal and physical custody is awarded to the biological mother, Ms. Rowena Hale. Silence. This court finds no grounds for appeal. The gavel tapped. Once, twice, then the words that ended the last piece of a war Rowena never chose. This hearing is adjourned. Lucian didn't stand. Rowena did. She thanked her legal team with a nod and walked toward the doors, heels quiet against the marble. Lucian looked up just once as she passed. Row. It wasn't angry. It wasn't arrogant. Just small. She paused, met his eyes, not with pity, not with rage, just clarity. "You wanted legacy," she said softly. "But you never understood that legacy isn't something you take. It's something you earn." She walked out. Outside the courthouse, the press was gathered, waiting like moths to a fading flame. But she didn't speak. A brief statement had already been issued through her attorney. No further comment. Rowena simply stepped down the courthouse stairs, one hand holding her bag, the other her phone, a photo of Silas on the screen. Waiting. Smiling. Safe. Eland was parked across the street. As she climbed in beside him, he didn't ask how it went. He didn't need to. She placed her hand gently over his. "It's done." He nodded, started the engine, and drove them home. Later that night, Rowena stood at Silas's doorway, watching him sleep, the blanket tucked under his chin, the nightlight casting a golden hue on his cheeks. She whispered into the quiet, "You're mine, and you always were." She sat beside his bed and brushed her fingertips across his hair. There were no cameras now, no judges, no arguments, just a mother and a boy, and a life that finally made sense again. The next morning, she received a final email from Lucien's legal team. Subject line, "Final transfer of custody documentation." The body was short. Everything had been processed. Everything she fought for was now official. She marked it as read, moved it to a folder titled "Closed," and never opened it again. She took Silas to the park that afternoon. Eland joined, brought a picnic basket. They sat under a wide oak tree while Silas chased birds and babbled about ants and tiny pebbles. At one point, Silas toddled over with a dandelion in his fist. "For you," he grinned. She bent down, kissed his forehead. "Thank you, my love." Eland watched them, arms folded loosely, eyes soft. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like nothing was stolen, like everything that's mine finally came home." They sat there as the sun moved. No paparazzi, no lawyers, no noise, just peace. Morning arrived without drama, just light spilling through the curtains, the scent of warm oatmeal, and the sound of Silas humming softly to himself as he arranged toy animals into a neat circle on the living room rug. Rowena watched him from the kitchen, a quiet smile curling at the corners of her mouth. This was her rhythm now, not events, moments. She brewed her tea, cinnamon spice, the kind she'd once saved for weekends, but now drank daily because every day deserved gentleness. Silas called from the other room. "Ama, the giraffe is sleepy. He needs a nap." She walked over and knelt beside him, gently laying the plastic giraffe on its side. "There. Now he's resting." Silas leaned against her arm for just a second before darting back to play. Later that morning, they took a walk around the neighborhood. Eland met them on the corner with a reusable tote of fresh fruit from the farmer's market. "Green apples," he said, handing her one. "You said those helped your thinking." "They still do," she replied with a smile. They walked in companionable quiet, Silas swinging between them, one hand in each of theirs. There were no reporters now, no whispers at the grocery store, no sideways glances, just neighbors watering flowers, waving hello. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and that was more than enough. That afternoon, Eland helped her sort boxes of books that had been in storage. Silas napped on the couch, his fingers still curled around a half-eaten cracker. "I never thought I'd have this again," Rowena said softly, holding a well-worn poetry collection from her college days. "A home. Not a house, a home." Eland looked up from a stack of alphabet books. "You built it, Ro, brick by brick." She sat down beside him, holding the book to her chest. "I used to think I needed to prove I was strong, that I could outlast anything. But healing wasn't about proving anything. It was about softening and choosing peace anyway." He didn't speak. He just placed his hand gently over hers. No urgency, no expectation, just presence. Later that evening, Rowena cooked dinner while Silas set the table. 3 plates, 3 napkins, a tiny glass cup for himself with exactly 3 ice cubes, his current obsession. As they ate, Silas asked about cloud shapes and ants and why carrots crunch. And then he paused. "Mama." "Yes, baby." "Why don't I live with the man from the news?" The question was simple, but its weight landed in the center of the room. She looked at Eland, who gave a slight nod. No panic in his face, just encouragement. Rowena placed her fork down. "Come here, sweetheart." Silas scooted into her lap. She smoothed his curls, then spoke slowly, like offering truth without fear. "You don't live with him because love isn't built on secrets, it's built on truth, and your home will always be filled with truth." "Even the hard stuff?" he asked, eyes wide. "Especially the hard stuff," she whispered. He nodded. "Okay." And just like that, he returned to his carrots. Later that night, after Silas was tucked in and the dishes were done, Rowena stood by the open window, the night air brushing against her skin. She wasn't thinking about the past, or the case, or the man who once tried to reduce her to a vessel for his ambitions. She was thinking about how tomorrow she'd take Silas to the museum, how she'd help him paint a picture of their family in his own way, how she would always answer his questions, even the hard ones. Because her love wasn't performance, it was a promise. 3 months later, the museum invited Rowena to curate a children's art exhibit. It wasn't glamorous. No red carpets, no champagne receptions. But as she stood beside Silas, holding his tiny hand while he looked up at paper, suns and crayon rainbows, it felt like a crown placed softly on her head. "You did this?" he whispered, eyes wide. "We did," she replied, "because every story deserves a place on the wall." He reached up to touch one of the drawings, his own, with stick figures and a wide smiling sun. "That's you, that's me, and that's Eland." She blinked slowly. "You drew us together." "Because that's our family." Later that evening, the three of them sat on a picnic blanket in the backyard. The summer air was warm, and the sky had just begun to blush with the first colors of evening. Eland had brought sparklers. Just a few. Not for celebration, for joy. Silas squealed as the sparks danced, writing invisible letters in the air. Rowena watched from a short distance, her heart soft and full. When the sparklers fizzled out and Silas climbed into her lap with sticky fingers and soot-smudged cheeks, she held him close. "You tired little flame? A little... Want to tell me your favorite part of today?" He thought for a moment, then whispered, "When Eland held my hand in the dark and said I was safe." Her eyes lifted to meet Eland's. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Later, while Silas slept soundly under a new blanket embroidered with his name, Rowena and Eland sat on the back porch. They shared a glass of cold cider, the kind Rowena used to sip alone in quiet rooms before sleep. Now it tasted different. Not better, not louder, just shared. "Do you ever think about the life you almost had?" Eland asked gently. She took a long breath. "I used to. For a while it haunted me. The gallery I thought I needed to run, the love I thought I had to preserve, the roles I thought made me worthy." She turned to him, voice steady. "But what I've learned is that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of meaning." He nodded. "And you have both now." "I do." The next day Silas brought home a class assignment. Each child had been asked to finish the sentence, "Love is." Some said giving hugs or sharing toys. Silas wrote, "Love is telling the truth even if it's hard." Rowena read it 3 times. She didn't cry. She smiled. The kind that stretches beyond lips, all the way into the heart. "That's a good answer, baby," she whispered into his hair later that night. "That's a perfect answer." They didn't speak much of Lucian anymore. Not out of fear, out of choice. Rowena answered Silas's questions when they came, but he rarely asked. And when he did, she answered with kindness and clarity. No edits, no shade, no venom, just truth. One morning, as they prepared for a nature walk, Silas stopped mid-zipper and asked, "Do you think he misses me?" Rowena paused, then knelt. "I think he misses a version of you he never took the time to know. But the real you, the full you, that's someone only a present heart can hold, and you deserve to be held completely." Silas nodded slowly. "Okay, that was enough." Later that night, Rowena journaled again, just one sentence. "My story didn't end when it broke. It began when I healed." Autumn arrived quietly in Charleston. The leaves shifted from emerald to copper. The breeze cooled, just enough to make Silas reach for his jacket before school. Rowena stood in the doorway, watching him wrestle with the zipper. "Got it?" she asked. "Almost." She stepped in, guiding the tab upward. "Now you do." "Thanks, Mama." He adjusted his backpack, then stood on tiptoe to kiss her cheek. "You gonna paint today?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'll write a little. Can I read it later?" "Always." After he skipped down the walkway and disappeared around the corner with Eland, who walked him to class every morning, Rowena stepped back inside. The house was quiet, but never empty. Not anymore. She walked to the small writing desk near the window. It had been a gift from Eland. Nothing ornate, just smooth wood, steady legs, and a top drawer with her initials carved softly into the inside. She opened her journal. No page this time. Just the back cover, the space people often leave blank. But Rowena never liked blank spaces. She picked up her pen. We spend so much of our lives trying to hold on to stories, people, versions of ourselves that no longer fit. But healing Healing is about letting go of what was stolen and choosing what is sacred. Today, I am not someone's aftermath. I am someone's beginning. She closed the journal and placed it gently on the desk. That afternoon, Rowena, Eland, and Silas visited the community garden. Silas had his own patch, sunflowers taller than his head, planted months earlier with sticky fingers and whispered wishes. He ran to them now, marveling at how they reached toward the sky. Look how big they are. Just like you. Rowena smiled. Do you think they know I planted them? They felt your care. That's why they grew. He reached up to touch a petal. Can we always come here? Yes, she replied. Even when I'm big. Even then. As the sun began to lower, casting gold over the rows of blooms, Silas climbed into her lap on the garden bench. Mama. Yes, baby. Are you glad I was born? Rowena stilled, breath catching for just a moment. I'm more than glad. I'm grateful. Why? She held his gaze. Because you remind me that the truth, even when it hurts, can still grow something beautiful. He smiled. I'm going to remember that. Good. I hope you do. They stayed until the sun kissed the horizon. No need to rush, because this was their time now. Not borrowed, not bargained, just theirs. As the camera pulls back, showing Rowena, Eland, and Silas sitting together on that bench, soft laughter drifting into the air, a final narration begins. Steady, calm, heartfelt. Rowena Hale was never after revenge. She was after something much more powerful, peace. She didn't fight to destroy him. She fought to protect what was good. In the end, justice wasn't the court's decision. Justice was a child growing up in truth, a woman reclaiming her name and love, learning to speak again without fear. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to walk the trail of truth with us every week. From the quiet corners of heartbreak to the bright fields of healing, this is Mr. Ross' Story Trail. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop choosing truth. Not every story ends with a bow. Some end with a breath, the kind you only take when you've finally laid a burden down. Rowena's story wasn't about vengeance. It was about value, knowing yours, defending it, and refusing to let anyone rewrite your worth. She wasn't loud. She didn't lash out. But she stood. In a world that often confuses silence with weakness, she reminded us that quiet strength can still shake mountains. Here are a few truths to carry from her journey. Love without respect is just control in disguise. Lucien wanted devotion without honesty, legacy without accountability. But real love doesn't demand silence. It listens. It honors. It shows up. Even when things are hard, you can survive betrayal, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by choosing not to let the pain rewrite your purpose. Rowena grieved. She questioned, but she didn't let the fire burn her spirit. She used it to warm what still mattered. Truth doesn't need revenge to win. One test, one thread of evidence. That was all it took. Because truth doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It waits. And when the moment is right, it stands tall. Sometimes the life you rebuild is stronger than the one that broke. Rowena lost what she thought was everything. But in that loss she gained clarity, peace, and a deeper kind of love. One built on patience, presence, and shared healing. Not perfect, not flashy, but real. What was the moment that hit you the hardest in this story? Was it the photo, the DNA test, the courtroom, or that simple question from Silas? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if Rowena's journey gave you strength, share this with someone who needs reminding. Broken doesn't mean finished. Sometimes it just means the next chapter is finally beginning. This has been another walk down truth's path with Mr. Ross' Story Trail.